what do you think makes a meaningful career?
What is the difference? Why you prefer coaching over mentoring? How do we distinguish ourselves from the pack? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You know?
And oftentimes our hands have to get dirty. What could be the best outcome for this situation? I'm Michael.
I'm Regine.
And this is Gears in Motion. So let's transition a little bit into something a little harder. So in thinking about, of course, hopefully most people listening to this, I know you can speak to some of the folks that were influential and were thoughtful in the way that they interacted with you, with me, with us. Can you talk maybe a little bit about some of the barriers in terms of folks that were influential and maybe not as positive way? Again, no, you don't have to, no names needed, but can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Thank you, Michael. Michael, as a female in the industry, as a minority female in the industry, as a woman of color, you do know that probably the largest issue that we face, first of all, is invisibility. Are we viewed? When we go into a meeting, when we sit with everyone, are we given the same level of attention that others have? And you will meet many women and many people of color, and especially women, who will tell you about their experience, at a meeting where they say something, they come up with an idea, and the idea is a great idea, and no one pays any attention. And then 5 minutes later, this man comes in and it states exactly what the idea was. And all of a sudden, everybody stops, everybody in their tracks. And wow, that's the best thing they ever heard. And everyone is like, wow, that's a genius idea. How come we didn't think of it before? And you're sitting there wondering, what happened here? I know I do have an accent. Like in my case, I have an accent, but it can't be that bad. And so sometimes I have learned, though, after that happened to me a few times, I have learned. So I used to go to my boss and ask, so what happened in that meeting? But then eventually I'm like, I can't expect someone else to pick up my battles or pick up or stand up for myself. So I would tell people, so, well, thank you for the translation. It seems like I just said that, but that's really to break the ice. But very often I would say, okay, let's discuss this further, because when I said it earlier, I did not have the same reaction. So tell me what you expressed differently, or what else your idea brought to the table that mine did that made it more palatable to people, or that actually caught people's attention.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to work with you to find out what it is. But I just said that. I think you just have to be, that's the thing also, you have to do it in a pleasant way, but you still have to do that, because people need to learn. You need to be able to have people stop for a minute in their tracks and think about the impacts of their actions on your creativity, your ability to participate, and so that eventually you end up with people sitting in a meeting and they don't say anything. And that's probably one of the reasons. But I also think that one of the things that's very important is a relationship with your manager. Also, because you can go back to them and ask them, because eventually they need to be able to support you and be an ally. So when things like that happen in a meeting, they can actually stop and ask you to repeat the questions or tell somebody, yes, Regine just said something similar to that. So you need to have a lot, and people who have more experience and more years, who have built up that credibility, needs to stand up and speak up on behalf of the younger engineers. And I also think that some of the barriers that we've seen is often enough. We don't land the prom assignments, right? And so we are sometimes also asked to go work when we hired into soft areas, right? As opposed to the hard technical areas.
Yeah.
And so when it's time for you to be promoted and you have to check all these boxes, then you find out that you don't really have as much as someone else.
Yeah.
And so when it also comes time to go and take your fundamental of engineering and your professional engineering exams, you're not as prepared as someone else. And that's something to watch for. And you can go talk to your boss and express the fact that you really would like to have more opportunities to work on some harder assignments. You can put that in your CPD, in your performance objectives. That way it is documented that you want to do that, so that eventually when it's time to make a decision, you agree with that on your boss, and you can, kind of force the issue also. One of and something very important as well, as you know, in our industry, relationships are very important. Networking is extremely important. It's good. You can be the best technical person, but if the client doesn't know you, doesn't know who you are and what you offer, you may never really have the value that they see in a PM, that you put their name on the project and the client knows them and they trust them and they give the project. So that's exactly. And so very often, for years, I've met a black woman one time who told me it took 3 years. She was sitting there. She was not a junior engineer, but she was never asked once to go to a meeting with a client. And I think those are the type of things that you also have to watch for, the environment. And if you cannot find anyone to help you and to be an ally, maybe that's not the right fit for you.
Did you say how many years did you say this woman?
She was 3 years. She worked for 3 years. She worked on difficult assignments. She was not a junior engineer, but she never was asked to go to a meeting with a client. And she reached out to me as another black woman. I was, with more experience than she did. She wanted to know if something was wrong with her.
She probably sat 3 years suffering in silence.
And could not really express anything, because she didn't think there would be someone there who would really care enough to help her.
Yeah.
Until I showed up and she was like, so do you think it's something wrong with me? And it wasn't. It wasn't at all.
In addition to the barriers that you expressed, not only those that were enumerated, but then to be able to sit with herself, or for anyone to sit with themselves and to play back the thoughts that are going on in their heads, the things that they're thinking about. Wow, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, you hear, I was writing a paper not long ago, and it was for Women's History Month in March. And so I was doing something, I was speaking to the role women play in the industry, and also the lack of progress in women in the C-suite in the industry. And I did the research. About half of the women will graduate with a engineering degree, actually after 5-6 years are no longer working in the profession. So we lose half of our, because they really become discouraged. They feel like they have to assert themselves every day on the job, and that can be exhausting also. So but at the same time, it's important that some of us, the ones who can, actually stuck with it or find ways to cope so that they can continue to move up, because hopefully as we have more representation of women and people of color in the ranks, leadership ranks and the executive, at the executive level, then we can help with those some of those issues and smooth those issues. And I know that I've been able to make a difference myself from what I hear from my mentees, so to know that it's important to be there and have a representation. Very important.
It's then becomes not just her problem or his problem, but it becomes our problem. And there's a community and a network.
Yes.
Built to be able to help, and a support system, right? A support system to help address and help whomever it is become successful.
I want to go back to what you talked about earlier with stifling, because I think to the extent you feel comfortable and open, I'd love to hear what you thought contributed to that, because I think a lot of young professionals, particularly early on, they think, hey, I don't have any technical skill, or I don't have anything to value, that I don't feel worthy to speak up. And I think it takes some practice, and I think it takes some acknowledgement that is in fact not the case. But can you tell me, what do you think? I know maybe you said it could be attributed potentially to, relationship personally with your father, but where do you think kind of gave you, maybe for lack of a better way to say it, lower self-esteem and being able to come to the table and believe that you can deliver value and to articulate that well? What do you think? Where do you think that came from?
That barrier? Well, if you speak to, I think, first of all, if you speak to any woman in the industry, they'll tell you, if they're being honest, that that's something they've faced. Yeah. Mm-hmm. At one time or another.
Sure.
And you need to learn to get over that. So I don't think it's so much that we feel it, but you've made to feel it, right? Yep. You made to feel it. And so I think it's incumbent upon us. I think now when we see this happen, to make sure we make sure we have everyone's voice is heard. Mm-hmm. And I think that very often people are angry about that, and so that anger accumulates itself. Mm-hmm. And so you either withdraw, and so you lose an employee that could be a very productive and a leader eventually, but they choose to withdraw because that's their way of protecting themselves from that situation. Or they become, and one day they just blow up, or one day that's another scenario where the person just blows off and just out of frustration, right? Yep. Expresses that. And when you do that out of frustration, it always comes out the wrong way, right? Yep. So I think, and as you say, what they have multiple studies that say you don't lose a company, you lose a boss, or you are staying with a company because of and if you cannot have a relationship with your supervisor who you think it can make a difference, I think that's really when you need to start looking for different ways, because like you said, you build up that credit, you build up that ability to speak up because you go to your boss. Like I said, you might ask them, so what do you think? This is what happened in this meeting. Because I'm always learning. I want to know what it is that I'm doing right, or I'm doing I could do better. Yeah. So what it is. So you end up finding out whether that person will support you or will not support you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And a lot of our decisions, right, are based on whether or not we think that's the right thing to do. I think that your generation is better at just going to another place or choosing something else. But back then, when I started working, people worked 30 years for the same company. We worked, and all of that. So it was difficult because it's almost like suffering in silence. But I will tell you, when I mentioned earlier, working outside of your work and develops, those skills or leadership skills. So you validated because you know what you worth. And so eventually you're able to bring that back to work and work with others to really work things out, those conflicts or maybe different ways of thinking and all of that. But you were asking at the time, the question was, what was the barriers? And I think that's the most obvious one that happens the most often. There are others, like not necessarily being having as a college graduate, you don't necessarily get the best assignments, the ones that are going to increase your technical skills. you know. And so when the time comes for a promotion, the other person who's had that and honed that is more ready to, you know, feels the check boxes, right? Can check the boxes that are that you have to fill in order to move to the next level. I think those are some of the barriers that you will see. And I think also in engineering, because it's a STEM discipline, it's also kind of for people maybe may think it's a little bit more rigid. It took maybe a little longer to the type of leadership, the servant type of leadership, etc. You see that being promoted around, but that wasn't always the case.
Right? Yeah. Yep.
That wasn't always the case. It was like, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you, when I started working in bridge design, they call my unit not a design unit, they call it a squad, the design squad, you know. So we had the wood design squads and we had the bridge design squads, and no one saw anything wrong with that. Squad. But that tells you the environment in which, you know, you had to
different season, different time,
100%. Different times. And so those are intimidating in themselves, right? And so you have to really be able to feel pretty confident, speak to people. And so I think also part of it is to establish personal relationships with people.
Yep.
Because the minute you start talking to people and establishing relationships and like I said, build your network out as well too. But, and I think one of the things you are good at, because I'll never forget when I first met you after this first meeting, you asked me to mentor you. Practically, you just reach out and say, can you? I wish I had done that early in my career. I didn't, and that's not even a possibility. That's not something I even considered possible, to walk to someone in a position of authority and ask them to give me their time.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to tell you what, I've learned the worst that someone can say is no. And I feel like, at least from my perspective, I always, when I ask for someone's time, I feel like I'm almost using it as like a feeler, right? If someone responds positive and says, great, yeah, I'd love to chat or I'd love to talk, then they're like, okay, great, fantastic. And most people, the way I always phrase it is, I learned this in business school. This is the one really big piece from business school I got is, would you be open? Most of the time, people do not want to tell you that they're closed to something. There are obviously times and opportunities for that, but most of the time, people want to be open. And I always feel like, I remember when I reached out to you, most of, at least from my vantage point, most of the time when I reach out to people, I say, oh, that's an interesting person. I'd love to learn more about them and learn to hear some of their experiences. But I always come at it from, at least in my mind, I'm always like, well, I'm going to ask and we'll see what happens. If they follow up, great. If they don't, oh, well, that's obviously not who maybe God intended for me to communicate with. But I'm going to tell you what, as even now, I've been doing that for a while, but even now I am still shocked when somebody comes back and says, yeah, sure. Fantastic. I'm always shocked because in my mind, I know people's time is precious, the most precious thing that we have. But yeah, I always feel like, it's kind of like, for lack of better terms, you remember, what is that movie? Let It Go, Let It Go. Do you want to build a snowman? I can't even think of it. Frozen, the movie Frozen. And all the little girl asks, do you want to build a snowman? Do you want to do something? And it takes someone to do that. And I think, I was having a thought earlier today. I was like, I think in some cases, it's the mentor that initiates. And then sometimes it really is the mentee being like, hey, would you want to X, Y, and Z? And I think that's helpful. You talked about challenges that are different today than they were when you were coming up in the STEM fields initially in your first 5 years of your career. And I'm sure thereafter, what challenges do you think are unique to the professionals today that are in the STEM field that, or maybe are more prevalent than they were when you were initiating your career?
I'm thinking what do I think is more prevalent today than they were,
or different?
Different. It's weird, Michael, because sometimes I think we were making great progress. And sometimes I see that progress being eroded.
Yeah.
I feel that when I started, there were a few other women in the profession. There should be more of us at the level.
Yep.
The C-suite and the executive, I think there should be more of us for what it is. So there is definitely a gap there.
Yeah.
And that's not, I'm not teaching you anything you don't know, right? And I think decisions are still being made a lot by the same, people. And by the same people. And power sharing is not something that is welcoming to everyone. That someone thinks is because people, that's what it is. It's a lack of control, they think, a lack of thing. And I think that we are the last frontier when it comes to civil engineering, transportation, etc. I think we're the last frontier when it comes to diversity, and because we lost a lot of ground. But I think what is also causing that is our primary, secondary education system net has definitely suffered in the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
You see that and I think that's one of the reasons you see the challenge, because and I did not realize even the better school systems teaching math, science, engineering is challenging even sometimes for those who teach it.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. I want to poke you there. Tell me a little bit more about, you think, the changes from the secondary school system that have
primary school system.
Yeah, primary school system. Yeah.
Because I look at what is happening in a lot of the rural and urban school districts. I look at the cuts, the budget cuts.
Yeah.
What goes away, and how we treat teachers, right?
Yeah.
And how they're leaving the profession. If you're my teacher, you have a better chance of a better career at Google. You're better respected, better paid, etc. And so I think there is a deficit that starts right there in the primary school system. And contrary to what people think, that if you're just good at math, you'll be successful. I don't think so. I think to be successful, maybe at engineering, if you want to be just a technical person, I think, yes, you need to be good. If you're good at math and the science, you're good at it. But if you want to be a successful person who happens to be an engineer, and you want to be a successful leader, you need to be good. You need to have that holistic view of the world, and you cannot just, look at just the technical side, because even the technical side is being delivered by by people. And that's an art, right? And so you need to balance both the science and the art in order to have a complete holistic human person. But in education, I see what is happening. Kids who don't need. There was a report not long ago, 4 years ago, about kids in the public school system that could not read well, write well. So how do you understand concept and theories that are abstract in nature, right? And so that you can enter college and be successful.
Sure. Yep. No, to be honest, I am a product of that system, Regine.
I know.
I did not, or I knew this, but my dad reminded me a couple of years ago. We were chatting up. I learned to read on Hooked on Phonics. I got to second grade, and the teacher sent me home with a note telling my dad that I could not read in the second grade. And my dad said, "Well, don't they teach that in school?" That was my dad's response. And so I did Hooked on Phonics. I could not read until I was in the third grade. I was memorizing words before I got to the third grade and started Hooked on Phonics with my dad. And he spent a lot of time with me. I can still remember we'd sit on the side of my bed and we'd have that big old stack of Hooked on Phonics, and we'd go through words: read, read. I mean, it was foundational, because then I could read. It was a skill, and my dad spent a lot of time helping me to do that. But I definitely, go ahead.
No, so that's a problem for us as a country, period. But when you look at us, at students of color, of color, it's even worse. And I'll tell you also some of the systemic issues on how we viewed don't help either. Because I tell you, I have two kids and they were the products of the public school system. They all both went to school, to college.
Yep.
And I will tell you, my son, when he was in middle school, because he was very good at math.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a engineer, of course, and my ex, you know, his father was is a mathematician, economist, right?
Yeah.
In econometrics, and so he was good at math. Now my daughter, that's a different story, you know.
Yeah.
But he was good in math, and so one of his teachers, his math teacher in middle school, asked me if someone was doing his homework for him.
Really?
Yeah, because she couldn't believe that he was getting like A's on all his math homework.
Well, let's do the math though here, right? Because your husband was an econometrist, you're an engineer.
Yes.
And it can't be just that he's naturally bright or naturally gifted. Someone else must be doing his homework.
Yes. So my response was, so how does he do when you test him in school? When you give him a test, a quiz, in his exam?
I have a feeling I know where this is going. What was
And
the
she
response?
said, well, he does well. I said, so what prompts, what's the reason for your question? Let's talk about your question for a little while here. So
I see exactly where you're going.
Okay. So exactly. And so you had to make them see, you had to understand. And so you start the year by he's doing well, so he possibly cannot be doing that. So eventually, because kids respond to expectations we have of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're not good enough for something, they will show you that they're not good enough for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's an issue. But the problem is we have a real talent pipeline issue when it comes to the STEMs. And that's why we're talking about it today.
That's why we're
because
talking
it's possible, it's feasible. Will there be hard moments? Definitely. But however, that's not enough. Life is hard, right? Life is it's not like it is. It's going to be a walk in the park if you go in another discipline either. But I think that we need to be at the table, because now you hear all this talks about equity in transportation and all of that. Or do you have that if you don't have diversity and inclusion in the...
Yep, you're right.
If we're not represented and we're not at the table helping make decision, like they say, right? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You know?
This is true.
This is Regine.
This is Michael.
Until next time.
Let's do this.